You're here because you want more. More engagement, more delight, more fun, more learning. You're hungry for change and willing to take action.
If you're not prepared to be wrong, you'll never come up with anything original.
Welcome to the E-Learning Scenario Design Podcast with Anna Sabramowitz.
I'm going to show you how great I am.
Let's take learning to the next level.
Hello, everybody. Anna Sabramowitz here, and I have a special guest with me today. His name is Mr. Jeffrey Dalto, and I'm going to read his fabulous bio. There he is, sitting beside me, virtually. All right. You guys, I got all warmed up because I did a Facebook Live before this, so I'm looser than usual, so this is good. Okay. So Jeff is an instructional designer and the senior learning and development specialist at Convergence Training, and he's worked in training and learning and development for about 20 years, in safety and safety training for more than 10, is an OSHA Authorized Outreach Trainer for General Industry OSHA 10 and 30, which is very industry specific because I don't know what that means. He has completed a General Industry Safety and Health Specialist Certificate from the University of Washington, Pacific Northwest OSHA Education Center, and is a member of the committee creating the upcoming ANSI Z490.2 National Standard on online environmental health and safety training. Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. I'm excited to be here. Thanks a lot for asking me to do this. I'm always excited to get a chance to talk to you.
Awesome. Good. I wouldn't have it any other way. All right. So I have a roster of questions. This one's going to be, I don't know how we're going to run this. Like, I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions, but I want it to be a conversation. And then I guess you're going to ask me questions after, and then we're just going to see who has the best set of answers. And then we'll have people vote.
I'm sure yours will be best.
All right. Flattery will get you everywhere. All right. Cool. So, our audience usually, I think it varies, but the audience is people who are either just getting into the instructional design realm or are people who have been in that learning world like forever, and now they're like pivoting, or they're taking the next level, or all of a sudden their company purchased an LMS system and they have to they're freaking out because now they have to, So that's kind of the people that we're talking to, I think. And if we haven't identified you, then please self-identify under one of the videos if we missed your demographic. So my first question to you then is, how did you get into the online learning profession? Your story, what drives you, and what gets you up in the morning? All
right. So like you, I believe, and like a lot of people, I think this is a common story. I'm a accidental instructional designer. As I've heard you say, not a lot of kids at 8 identify instructional design as a career goal. It's not right up there with firefighter or ballerina dancer. And most of them sound cool. So that's me as well. I graduated from college with an English literature degree. I had been reading, fiction and what was called critical theory back at the time, and philosophy and religious studies. And so I think one could argue that I was low on the spectrum of employable skills. So I moved off to Seattle, Washington, and I had been working a series of manual labor jobs. I was working as a roofer. I worked in a fish packing place. I had similar jobs like that. I was stacking things at the end of a printing press. And I got a temporary job at an educational producer, and they were making laser discs at the time, which kind of triangulates the time era, late 80s, early 90s, and they were science-based databases. So you could take a little barcode reader, scan a barcode, see what was probably a stunning image of a paramecium, and read a paragraph about parameciums. And but in addition to that, and by the way, I wasn't even working in the production department. I was answering the 1-800 sales number and doing mail for the sales department. And thank you to the salespeople, but I'm not born to be a salesperson. So I was in, and it was a 2-week job, and apparently I could answer the telephone number and mail things competently enough that it became permanent. Woo! Which was important at the time. I was noticing they were doing these laser disc things, which looked, it was pretty snazzy at the time. But there were also these people in the back corner who were doing something new. And they were doing this kind of weird, zany skit-based problem-solving stuff where asking school kids to apply science knowledge after getting like an intro story and being asked by the lead character, can you help me solve this problem? Then they could interview other characters, work with simulated science lab and science tools, look at additional resources, do some tests.
This is in the 80s.
This is in the late 80s or 90s. If you Google science sleuths or even bioethics forums, you'll see some math sleuths as well.
Yeah.
And so those people were pretty interesting, and I was kind of wondering if I could ever work with them. In my capacity as sales support, I walked into the copy room one day. I was wearing a t-shirt that said Sun Ra after one of my favorite 1960s avant-garde jazz artists. And the consultant who did all this zany problem-solving stuff walked in as well to the copy room, and he was also a Sun Ra fan. And so we struck up a conversation, and ultimately that got me out of sales and into production. And whatever that was, 1989, 1991, I've been working in learning and development ever since. So Mark Lutwack, the theater director, has been a big influence and mentor in my life ever since. His wife, Y. York, great playwright, go catch her stuff in Seattle. And then the education guy who did it too, Sean Taylor, a science educator. And then I've been fortunate enough to work with a lot of other really bright and helpful people in my career. So that's kind of the, what gets me going. I guess we'll talk about it a little bit more, but so why did I stay in this career? It's because it's kind of interesting. I didn't join it intentionally, as it wasn't a lifelong dream, but it's one of the things you fall in, you start to realize this is kind of fascinating how this, this all works. And then you realize you can actually, help people with some of their own goals. So the fact that it's a fascinating career and the fact that you're helping other people has been more than enough to keep me going over the days.
That's very cool. And I'm just thinking about the fact that what you wear matters. That's not the advice I'm going to give, but whatever. I think that's actually so cool that that one of the things that comes out from these conversations is that when you meet somebody who has that knowledge and they're open to sharing it and taking you under their wing, I feel like there's a lot of us just need that little bit of a break to just to get in there and have somebody support us, and the tough love, but also just an expert to guide you. That's cool.
Yeah, I really benefited from that, from Mark and his wife Y, and others who I worked with later. And I see this a lot now in through the internet with social media and the ability to watch people like yourself sharing information, watch someone like Dr. Will Tallheimer or Patty Shank or Kathy Moore, and which obviously wasn't available in 1989. But it's a cool new addition. And so I feel like I was fortunate then, and it feels like the opportunity to do that kind of stuff is even more present now and even easier.
It is easier, but I feel like because it is easier, it's not necessarily taken as seriously.
No, that could be.
Right? Yeah. And the other thing is, and I know this from just working with mentors that have mentored me, if you try to if you try to follow the mentorship of too many people, then it actually, you really should just do a deep dive and then get their stuff, immerse, and then move on almost until they stop feeding that need. So that's an interesting conversation. We should have that sometime. Okay.
Yeah,
so,
I agree. I actually find I do that even now. You probably do this too. When I'm trying to research something, I'm kind of torn in a million different directions about the things I'd like to know more about. You probably are too. And I'll take a deep dive that'll last maybe 10, 20, 30 weeks, whatever it is. And then I'll have to move on to something else. But I do tend to focus on that one chunk as long as I can.
I think that's actually the upper edge, to be honest, because there's a lot of people who do that. They get in just enough to get, it's very shallow. It's very shallow. So I think that if anything, that's actually advice I would give to people, is the fact that deep dives are very useful, and specialization, at least in that moment, sticking through it and actually, like, especially if you find somebody who resonates with you and just going through everything that they've ever published. Like, if you love Dan Pink, don't stop at the first book, read all of it, right? So do that kind of thing. So what advice would you actually have for a novice instructional designer? The person who's like really wants to make a difference, be proud of their work, because that's the number one question actually I get, other than like subject matter expert stuff, is, I want to, like, I know I can do better. I want to do better. And then on the stuff I'm putting out, I'm not proud of it all.
Yeah. Well, I guess the first thing I would say is, just have faith in yourself and keep at it. And it's okay to have doubts about yourself, and it's okay to not be perfect just yet. And, I would follow, again, same advice I gave earlier. Follow experts like yourself and people like Julie Dirksen and Kathy Moore and these people. Get some books, go to some conferences, if you're making e-learning courses, go to places like things called e-learning heroes from Articulate, where they have these opportunities, little challenges or competitions that they do every week, I think. Any opportunity where you can practice and keep putting these skills and ideas to work, get constructive feedback on it. And then, just believe in yourself, don't get down on yourself, and know that over time you will in fact get better if you're getting good information from good people, following good models, working hard, practicing, getting feedback, and applying that feedback to make your work better. And it's a really fun career. I would recommend people do it, and don't get down on yourself if you're not the king of the world on Tuesday. Friday will come.
Because I think it's like anything, right? You are gonna suck for a long time until you get better. And I think that the challenge is that you do look at finished products out there and you think, oh, wow, who am I? But I think that happens in every single profession.
Yeah, we all suck. And like, we all have to get through that and get to a stage of sucking less, and none of us will ever be perfect. I speak at safety conferences, and I give presentations on safety training. And one of the first things I tell them is, like, no one's walking out of here a safety training expert today.
Please no.
And frankly, no safety training is going to be better. And by the way, what the presentation I'm giving to you right now, which I have workshopped for years, is not going to be perfect. And I'm going to get a little better next time. So as long as you're doing your best and getting better every time, you're on path.
I think what you mentioned is also very important, that idea of feedback. I think that's something we crave, because especially when you put out learning and you are so far removed from the end user that your feedback comes back sometimes like 3 months later, maybe, right? Like, so it's upfront feedback is good too. Yeah.
I think I've told you, I recently read Anders Ericsson's book, Peak, which is about what's called deliberate practice for creating expertise. And just because it's in my mind, I feel like I see people writing about it constantly as well.
Yeah.
That's one of the things he identifies in deliberate practice is set a very specific goal, not just like when I play basketball or something, generally my goal is get better, but I never do get better because I don't have any specific focus goals, like improve my shot by not bending my elbow, keeping my elbow straight and keeping my hand underneath. If I just did that for hours, I'd get a lot better than going out and playing 21 or some pickup ball.
Yeah.
But it's not fun. It's not as fun as playing pickup ball, so you don't do it. But if you set specific identifiable goals and then work hard at them for a long time, even if it's not fun, and then either monitor, this is a conversation you and I had in the past as well, monitor the consequences of your action, which is a form of feedback. Oh, I ended up missing all those shots anyway. Maybe it was my elbow. Or even better, I think this is a term I made up, but there's a improvement accelerator that can come from a third party, especially an expert third party observer who's giving you some form of feedback. And if you're getting that outside objective third party feedback on your performance, and if you put it to work and change what you're doing as a result, you can really improve over time, much more quickly than you would on your own. Or maybe you wouldn't really ever improve on your own. Like I'm still not in the NBA.
Is that a goal? Is that something we should be looking forward to?
Well, in college, I thought, well, I could play in the Italian leagues, but I'd be okay in Milan. But I never even made that.
I like that phrase you had, the improvement accelerator. That's really cool. And that idea, so you said it would be with expert oversight. And that's what everybody says, that if you are, let's say at some level and you reach a plateau and you've been there for a while, it might be that you simply cannot see or ask yourself the kinds of questions because you're not seeing things at the next level because you're not there. Like it's like your personal limit. So in order to get to the next piece, the 10x, you have to like get somebody who's there already, almost.
Right. Which is a challenge. Sometimes your SME doesn't always know what he or she does in order to become an expert.
That's true.
But hopefully, if the SME can kind of recognize what you're doing wrong, or how you can improve your performance, that SME can still be helpful.
Yeah, that's true. I don't think that everybody who is an expert is actually a good teacher, right? Sometimes they're just or a coach. That takes to be that person also takes some work to train that person to be a good coach, right?
Not to get too far off track, and I'll keep it short, but Vox has this really cool online series they put on Facebook, and they're like little 10-minute things about music. And one of the things, they had a little 10-minute video about what's called the Coltrane changes, which is the Coltrane song Giant Steps. And it's incredibly fast and incredibly complicated. And Coltrane could do it. And he brought his band into the studio, and his pianist, who I believe was Tommy Flanagan, was supposed to improvise over this kind of stuff that Coltrane had been practicing on for years. And he had a unnatural ability to do it, probably because of all sorts of complicated mental models he had in his head. And if you listen to the recording, it's got, once it's pointed out, it's almost comical, like how unable Tommy Flanagan is to improvise over these chord changes because they're happening so fast. And I don't think, like, even though Coltrane could do it, I don't think he could have taught Flanagan how to do it. So there are times when maybe a SME, I suspect Coltrane couldn't have just taught that quite so easily. But other times, I think where it's a little more accessible and a little more teachable.
Yeah, that's true. So, all right. Now you said things like, you gave the advice for the novice instructional designer, and it really is about practice, reflection, setting goals, all those things, and also just realizing there's a journey there. It's not perfection from the very beginning. But what do you think are some fundamental knowledge and skills that somebody needs, an attitude that somebody needs to have to kind of get to the next level?
Yes, that's a good question as well. I'm going to kind of borrow from design thinking and say, like, a fundamental 100 level skill for instructional design is empathy. I think it's an important skill, increasingly important skill in the workplace, and will be more so when we're working next to all these robots and we have to figure out, like, what value we bring, And so they have an empathy robot. But so I would say empathy, and in terms of learning, I think that includes, first of all, trying to put yourself in the learner's shoe, talking in the learner's shoe, and figuring out when they need to learn something and when they don't. Because there's a lot of times, when you're being asked to create an e-learning course, and it's not even something anyone needs to learn. It's just like maybe someone needs to reorganize the work area or change the work process or something like that. Or maybe just create a performance support tool, which would be just as good, as opposed to simply going into, the e-learning course mode, or that let's schedule an instructor-led training mode. So I think that's fundamental. Is just like, when can I actually help you as an e-learning designer or an instructional designer? And then, finding out basic things like, how do people learn, which my favorite source, or at least one of my favorite sources, is Julie Dirkson's book, Design for How People Learn. Figuring out, once you know that how people learn, how can I help people learn based on that understanding? And then again, how can I assist people when learning's not required, but something else is? But I think that skill of empathy, which maybe isn't always natural and doesn't come up a lot in wonky discussions of technical skills for e-learning designers, might be high on the list.
That is so neat. I just, because I ran a live just before this, and one of the things that I do there is just kind of reflect on what I've learned, because it really is just me talking out loud after as people ask me questions. So it's a good process of synthesis. But one of the things that came up in a different interview was, I said, I asked somebody the same question, and they said humbleness. And to me, both empathy and humbleness come from this area of no ego. And so when you enter into these relationships, I always say you're not working, like, it's not about you. It's about the learner, right? You're on their behalf. So it's kind of cool you said that empathy, because it really is that. It's understanding what somebody else's needs and perspectives are. It's not your own, but you're thinking about. It's really,
and that's why I think you made a good point to connect it to humbleness. You're not just walking in with the silver bullet and you don't need to. Yeah. So you're looking at other people's needs and trying to figure out how you can best help them. I think that's a good first start.
Yeah. I don't know. Are you a fan of Jordan Peterson?
I'm embarrassed to say I don't know who Jordan Peterson is.
Oh, that's okay. He's one of the most famous Canadians right now. That's okay. I forgive you.
We love our neighbors to the north.
It's cool. Anyways, so one of the things he says, and he's he's an intellectual and also wrote a great book, 12 Rules for Life. Awesome book. But he talked about the fact that even he, like, the guy's like off the charts, super smart, right? But he says he walks into every single situation with saying, I can learn something from this person. And he's like, he's on the stratosphere of like IQ, and he thinks that way. Right? So we should all be just a little bit more empathetic and humble, because that's, we should be anyways. And I like that approach as well. That's, everybody has something to teach you, so you can learn something new from them.
Yeah. I thought you were the most famous Canadian. But Jordan Peterson, I wrote that down. Thanks for the tip. And I agree with that too. And I usually find every time I'm in an instructor-led training course that I definitely end up coming out with as much information as I shared.
Yeah, those are actually the best. It's funny because even when people resist in organizations they think that mentoring other people is a hassle. And I always think you understand that this is almost, if not more, an opportunity for you to like up your game, because you learn so much through that mentorship process. Yeah. So I'm like, you don't get it. It's for you.
So I agree. And one of my interests is in organizational structure and how organizations set themselves up. And I'm like everybody, I think we'd be better off collapsing those hierarchies and also destroying silos. And I think you're exactly right. Yeah. It is great for a mentor to be able to work with a new hire and teach him or her all these things, but you get a lot out of it in return. And there's a big movement in safety, which we'll probably end up talking about here, that I have an interest in, called Human and Organizational Performance, or Safety Differently, or Safety 2, or New Safety. And one of the big things is recognizing that we tend to think of safety managers as like the boss with all the answers, and workers as the people who are just out there creating problems. And if we could just control those people until we can get a robot in there, everything would be better. But they're pointing out, like, it's actually the worker who is the expert. The safety manager should be learning from the worker, and so on. And so I agree with Jordan Peterson and a lot of others that you can always learn from the people you're working with.
Mm-hmm. So, and yeah, we definitely want to get into this, because I think that especially if you're thinking about a learning organization and you want to promote different types of learning, then mentorship and coaching is like a huge chunk of that, right? I think it's weird because the trades, right? Like they're all about apprenticeship, right? And then for some reason, it's like, there's been now this disconnect. And like you said, the employees are like the source of all the problems. And then like the silos it's deviated a lot because of, I think, the volume of people. You think?
Yeah. And I'm speaking a little over my head, but I think that Europe and Germany in particular has done better at keeping that apprenticeship model. And I know that sometimes I've been out to like South Carolina and for business, and there's like a new BMW plant, and it was new last 10 years, and they brought the apprenticeship model with them, and it's really helped, really been an improvement for their workforce.
You know what? That's so weird. I never actually thought about that, but I worked with Adidas, and they have, and they're like a retail shoe company, right? But they have like the whole idea of internship and apprenticeship is also like it's in their ethos, which is kind of cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So, um, what are your, okay, I threw this one in because I'm finding this word confidence really coming through lately as, okay, okay, let me just frame this. So, I talk to a lot of people who have amazing skills, amazing talent, and then they're still afraid or extremely thin-skinned to get feedback, and it just holds them back. Or they're like, they won't listen to me, or they're, and I think that what's happening in our industry is we focus so much on the development of the end product. We don't think about all the things that need to be in place in the individual to actually be a leader, do all those other things. So, okay, how do you build confidence as an individual, as a professional? What's your strategies?
So, and make sure I get back to the point you made about like actually putting out stuff, getting, constructive feedback and changing. But, like, and I think this is an issue for everybody. We all have the little demon of doubt sometimes. And at least for me, I can say that like as an accidental instructional designer, somebody who didn't have a degree and all that, certainly there have been my moments when I kind of doubted myself for that reason too, and it's kind of even held me back a little bit. But in terms of like my solutions, I am not above giving myself the little train that could talk every so often. But other than that, it's just the kind of things we've been talking about already. Learning from people, doing hard work, practice, setting goals and monitoring your progress towards reaching those goals, reflection and self-evaluation. How am I doing? And then I'm a big fan of working out loud and networking, so you can learn from other people. Again, get that kind of feedback. Here's our segue. Great. And whether you're working out loud and working with people in your social media network to figure, kind of as a BS detector, or where can I get better or whatever, or if you do it internally, I think it's important to realize that, that feedback is intended to make you better. And maybe one way, and this is something from design thinking again, is if you come out with like kind of more of a small scale beta and test it, maybe you won't. I think I've heard you talk about this, and I'm taking this from Aaron Pradon, who's an L&D professional out in Australia. Maybe you won't be quite so emotionally invested and quite so hurt if somebody says it's not the Mona Lisa of e-learning development, and it's easier for you to modify at that point. But I just think in general, you have to embrace failure. It's one of the greatest learning opportunities we have. Define failure any way you want along that spectrum, somewhere from less than perfect, which is the human condition. So we all live in that condition of less than perfect. We're all failing in some sense. We can all learn from that failure. And it's those failures and those lessons that are going to make us better and make our materials better. So I think we just have to realize it's part of the process and embrace it, even welcome it. And then again, maybe if it's a smaller little beta, it'll make you feel better when somebody mentions some flaws.
So you mentioned design thinking. Did you take a course, or how did you learn about design thinking? Because for me, it was all like, it's all over the place.
Yeah, so my intro was Aaron Pradon, and then through him, I started going to the Stanford D School.
Yes.
Yeah. So those have been my primary sources. And then I also, right up there with you, another one of my e-learning heroes is Connie Melamed, our instructional design heroes. And I've learned a deal from her as well. And in fact, I think both Aaron and Connie Melamed do conference presentations on it, but I've never been fortunate enough to see them. I would love to.
Yeah, I've only been able to see, it's actually pretty cool because Arun has a couple of workshops that he videotaped. They're on YouTube, which that's how I got my intro too. So one of my students, they're like, have you seen this stuff? It's awesome. And I was like, yes, it is awesome. He's got a very unique perspective, like just looking at it's more big picture. He looks at things more big picture. And he was kind of like, I've been to design thinking stuff before, but I think he really contextualized for me the way that it's used in learning versus product dev,
Right. That kind of thing helps a lot.
Yeah.
And I guess, I don't know if we got to we talked about this or not, or if it was on our agenda, but I love that idea of like, examples of how to put it into context and that kind of thing, demonstrations. We learn a lot from that, and that's really effective. And yeah, you can read something like design thinking and wonder, how can I do this? But how does this really relate? Sounds like a good idea, but what do I do? And then to have someone like Aaron kind of like put it into context for you helps a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. The other thing I found, maybe I'll mention this a little bit later, but I wanted to, because you're one of the few people I know that talks about lead measures and lag measures.
It talks about what, I'm sorry?
Lead measures and lag measures.
Oh, leading and lagging indicators, is what we call it.
Yes. So
because of the safety, it's because of the safety aspect,
which I think is something that, if we're designing from the world of design thinking for product development, we should be doing more of that. So I think we should be also borrowing from the safety world for instructional design for these things. Could you tell us, actually, if you don't mind, tell us a bit what are lead and lag indicators?
Sure. For those who don't know.
Which is a lot of us.
And I'm speaking especially kind of from my safety background right now. And terms are probably used more generally than that. So the simple way to look at it is lagging indicators are from the past and leading indicators are from the future. So lagging indicators count things that have already happened. So in safety, it might be something as simple as your number of days without an accident, or the number of they call them incidents that you have had. Yeah, things that you can't change. And there's supposedly a way to measure your performance. I'm sure like in marketing, they have lagging indicators for like how many people came to our website, how many people downloaded guides, and how many people bought something after, watching our Twitter thing, But there are things that happened in the past and are an attempt to measure your performance based on that. And then leading indicators, on the other hand, are things that are supposed to influence the future. And so, even a simple example is you have safety training as part of your safety efforts because you're trying to prevent some kind of accident. So that safety training, in theory, might be a leading indicator. Whether or not it's really a reliable and valid leading indicator would be a different issue. But so there's a big movement in safety. Safety's always been obsessed with the lagging indicators, especially things like incident rates. And there's been a big movement in safety to move away from that and to try to incorporate more of an emphasis on leading indicators. And if someone's interested in that, the National Science Council's Campbell Library has a great white paper on it. It's not hard to find that kind of information. But in general, the idea is, why don't we try to focus on the future, because the past already happened, at least as I experienced time. But there are also other criticisms of the use of lagging indicators in the safety world, including focusing on incidents, and not to get too deep into the woods, because it's something that's pretty interestingly philosophical. I could pull out some philosophy books that I hadn't, that were dusty since college to follow some of these new safety guys. But there are other criticisms about too much focus on lagging indicators.
So it's almost like the idea that you have, when you're looking at a lag indicator, there's nothing you can do about it anymore. It's simply the end result. So it's like, hey, we did this stuff and here's what happened. And so
that's one of the initial criticisms. It's already happened. So like, you're not going to change anything.
So a lead indicator would be something where you'd have, let's say like, okay, I know that if I look at my weight and I could say, oh, today I weigh, 150, right? 150 pounds. But I know that a lead indicator for losing more weight would be, let's say, if I walked every day for 30 minutes, that would probably improve my chances of getting a better lag indicator number at the end of the month? Is that
leading indicator? Yeah, but that's a great, like, to put it into everyday language, that's a great example. Your goal is obviously to lose some lbs
yes.
or weight up in some of that. And so those leading indicators are the things that will help you reach that goal, right? And so, yeah, how many days this week did I take a walk? And how many days this week did I eat fewer than 2,000 calories? How many this week did I not binge on chocolate brownies at night? Those are things that will affect the future.
Yeah, very cool.
As opposed to beating yourself up about 2 pounds that you gained in the past.
Exactly, which I can't do anything about that. So all I can do is just somehow modify my behavior. Or see, this is to me where this would be kind of difficult, because I think that there's a lot of things that you can do that could be conceived as lead indicators. But if I say consistently, like, is that hard for you? Like, you obviously need to work with subject matter experts and say, hey, if we do this for the next 30 days, just focus on that. Do you think that'll improve our outcome? Is that kind of?
I think all forms of metrics and measurement and performance measurement are kind of stuck with that. It's hard to know what's a meaningful measure, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, Nate Silver's book, The Signal and the Noise, is a good example of that. There's all sorts of noise out there, but you want to try to find the signal of something that's really going to happen, and it's not easy, and it takes some thought. And so we tend sometimes to measure, even if you're trying to create a leading indicator, we tend to focus on things that are just noise, maybe because they're the easiest thing to measure. They're the measures that are most available to me. So, in e-learning, a classic example is course completions, right?
That's great. Yeah.
Yeah. But is it meaningful? Probably not. Is it going to lead to behavior change and improve performance, better efficiency, better employee engagement, retention, more innovation, more creativity? Probably none of those things. But it's easy to measure because my LMS tells me the answer.
Yes.
And so I can, we tend to focus on that kind of thing. So I think it's important to know, to try to measure for leading indicators at times, to try to find the correct metrics to try to focus on signal, not noise, but also to know that sometimes there's like a limit to data. Sometimes either the data we have can't give us the information, the answer we'd like, or just data can't do it. So data's great, use it, but use it wisely and don't think it has all the answers.
I understand that. Yeah. Culture and all those other things play a part too. Huge.
Yeah. There's a lot of like non-data forms of evidence in the workplace.
Yeah. That's a really good point. So this one I'm interested to hear, because I've been involved in some apprenticeship type training and things like that. And it's weird because where my audience was just 18-year-old kids straight out of high school wanting to be electricians, right? So you're dealing with, what's your audience? Is it a full gamut or of people?
At my workplace, you mean?
Yeah.
So we have a number of customers who are often telling us, hey, we're bringing in all these young employees, oftentimes to replace aging baby boomers.
Yeah.
And so those people have a lot of skill and a lot of knowledge, but maybe don't always know the work process as well, obviously. And then we still have customers who have aging employees. I'm 52, my age or older. Some people who've been working at a mill or a plant or a factory for 40 years. I've been talking kind of intermittently over email with one of our customers, a guy named David. I think he's 70. And he's been working for at least 40 years somewhere in Kentucky. And so, we have a full gamut of ages.
Wow. So upskilling, reskilling. All
of that. Yeah. So like, again, you've got these college grads or young workers who are coming in, but really just need to understand in some cases, obviously they know the process, but others they don't. A lot of times with the older workers, it's going to be an idea of upskilling, especially creating digital skills. And again, to go back to Aaron Pradon, I think increasingly an important thing to do as a company is not just going to be teaching me how to do skill X, Y, or Z at the workplace, but teaching me how to learn and relearn. And that's where I find him so valuable. Well, one of the ways. And I think that's going to be increasingly important in the workforce in the future.
You know what? I 100% agree with you, because I've the anecdotal experience that I have with older professionals, especially in the trades industry, is some have this mindset that they've mastered it, and there's no, like, they don't like new things, they don't like new tech, and it's not the same quality.
I run into that. And
I think it's both, but
I see other people who bust that stereotype, but I've certainly run into that. Certainly at times, for sure.
Yeah, it's an advantage, right? I mean, really, as far as I'm concerned, that's like a Darwin Awards professional kind of elimination process.
Well, that's probably right, and especially as change is going to happen more and more frequently.
Yeah. So, what do you think? Speaking of adult learning, because this is the realm we're living in, what takes adult learning, do you think, to the next level, especially in your realm of safety training?
Yeah, so I thought about that a little bit. I had these questions in advance, and I tried to be clever, but I really couldn't be clever. Couldn't think of anything to say. So I thought, like, I'd start by talking about being engaging, but then I thought I'd also mention I'm not sure what engaging means really, and I think nobody's really sure what engaging means, and then it got worse because it's so general. And then it got worse because it became a buzzword, and so nobody even thinks about what engaging means, right? You just know it better be engaging.
We want to make our stuff engaging, Jeff. What's up with that? Go for it. Turn on the button.
Yeah, as long as it's the E word. But, I think a lot of the stuff in safety training is true in all training. It should be relevant to somebody. It should fit their actual learning need. Just basic adult learning principles here. It should capture their interest in all sorts of ways. There are a million, well, not a million. There's a relatively small number of evidence-based methods that improve training. One is something that you do great, storytelling. Like, there are different ways to capture interest. Storytelling is one of them. Any kind of active learning, I'm a big fan of. I was thinking about this earlier. I'm a big fan of examples and demonstration. We talked about Aaron showing us an example of how to apply design thinking to e-learn development. But I was just having the same conversation online with Patty Shank about how worked examples are so important early in learning, and then kind of removing that scaffolding. Back to Anders Ericsson and this idea of deliberate practice, that idea of practice, hard work, and then again, seeing consequences and feedback. I think all that stuff is really important. But then I think in all kinds of learning, including in safety training, I think you really have to, again, break down that top-bottom hierarchy, that idea that the manager tells and the worker listens, and change from a one-way discussion to a two-way discussion. In particular, in safety training, removing yourself from the kind of compliance focus. I know we all have to comply with what our safety regulators like OSHA tell us to do. You have to give certain training, and you have to create certain reports, and you have to put up your OSHA poster and submit your incident data yearly online. But that can't be the focus of your program. And that's again where I'm really intrigued by these people who practice safety under different names: human and organizational performance, or HOP, safety differently, safety two. One, they have this emphasis on having managers learn from the employees, or learning together as a team. They often talk about having learning team events. And two, they understand that there's a lot more learning that we can do other than just safety training, and that the whole idea of safety as distinct from operation is wrong-headed and arbitrary. Safety is applied operations. And so, I think thinking of safety as distinct from operations leads to things like, I'm going to get up and lecture you with a PowerPoint, or I'm going to read you a regulation, none of which causes anybody to learn. So I think if you remember that in safety-specific context, safety is applied operations, and then maybe even reconsider your definition of safety. It's not the lack of incidents, but it's the maybe it's the increased potential for success under different conditions, which is a definition I'm stealing to the best of my ability from a guy named Eric Hallnagel. But so, engagement, but also broadening engagement with all those different definitions of engagement, but broadening the perspective of safety training and think of it more in the context of learning, more in the context of learning from employees, and more as creating success. And I think that's a good way to think about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm glad you you brought up how ambiguous engagement is, because I think that when I talk to clients and they say, "Oh yeah, our goal is engagement," I really have to unpack that, because I have no idea what they've looked at that they thought was engaging, and what engages you might be completely different than what engages me, right? And
Right.
it is that context and all those other awesome things that you mentioned.
But I do think there are workable tools to, fit in that vague bucket called engagement. And clearly,
Yeah.
you use them, storytelling, scenario based. You do a lot of that stuff, and there are other tools as well.
Yeah.
Practice, feedback. But yeah, engagement. It sounds great. Who doesn't want to be engaging? But
Yeah.
anyway,
And one thing that I always think about is the fact that like movies are engaging.
Yeah.
But it's not like they produce any results, right? So it's almost like you have to step back and say how much of this edutainment is going to produce that outcome that I want. And actually, I don't know if you've probably checked out Will Thalheimer's performance focus smile sheets.
Yeah. I love that book.
It's fabulous. I think everybody should just read it 14 times. But one of the things that I really got what he said when he said, when you're launching programs, the only thing you can really measure is the effectiveness of that piece, and you're getting feedback on the learning piece, right? Not necessarily the impact. Although I think that if you do the follow-up right, you could actually say your measure could be, did you find that the resources that we shared in the module or in a workshop, that you actually are using the same resources effectively and they're helpful on the job?
Yeah.
All those, you could, if you structured it. Now, one of the other things that I've been discussing, because I'm working with a company that's trying to implement an academy for all of their staff. So basically centralize all of the learning and all those things. One of the things we've been discussing is for employees to give star ratings on each course. And some people are like, that's great. And some people are scared as hell of this concept, because I don't think that I think that is a scary thing to know out there, get that blatant, this sucked, you got 1 star, your product sucks. And I don't know if we're doing that enough. I'm game. If they want to do that, I'm like, this is awesome, because the truth will come out. And even if something is amazing, but it has no context, it'll be so evident because you're obviously not sharing that clearly enough or you're targeting the wrong audience. There's so many awesome metrics that can come out of that. So using the employees to feedback, to say if they're using the things in the meaningful way, they're finding it worth their time. It's just gold. I'm like, let's not waste this opportunity.
That's a really interesting arena you open up there. Shout out to Dr. Will Thalheimer. He's got this new learning evaluation model called LTEM that I recommend listeners go check out, in addition to that book on smile sheets. Both, he does a lot of great work.
He does.
He brings up constantly, including in that book, though, in relation to the stars for this is a 2-star course or 5-star course, is a lot of people, including consumers of learning, cannot accurately judge if it was an effective learning event.
Yes.
So I might give that a 5-star. I might give that 5 stars because I thought it rocked, or because I thought it was engaging, and maybe it was, But
yes.
But did I learn anything, and did I apply it tomorrow or anytime in the future? That's a different issue. And sometimes I think those are kind of reductive 1 to 5 gold star.
True.
Things could be misleading.
Yes.
But it's also scary because not only are you getting feedback, but it's public. There's a big thing with that
Yes.
now as well, where your people are supposed to submit their incident information online, and the whole world can see it, and then everyone, and OSHA did intentionally. It was a blame and shame strategy.
But it's an accountability thing too,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. The other thing, I'm so glad you brought up the kind of edutainment thing, because I talk about that in conferences a lot. You know, like we talk about like, is training supposed to be fun, and also like, when should you quit throwing in those interesting little tidbits? And I often talk about the fact that, like, you know, leave the interesting tidbits out, because I can go home and watch the Discovery Channel all I want, you know.
Yeah.
And I'll get full of those tidbits. And I often talk about my dad, and I did this with my dad. You know, like, I grew up watching wildlife shows with my dad on TV. My dad watched them all the time. They're full of all sorts of interesting tidbits. But my dad is not a professional biologist now. You know, that never enabled him to change his career. So, yeah.
But I bet you he did great on that Jeopardy category.
I'll check in. I'll let you know.
You know, it's actually pretty true. It's almost like, and the more I learn, the more I design, the more I realize that people are, we come in with a lens of trying to give people too much.
Mm-hmm.
And if we just got down to that 20% essentials, and we're okay with that, we're like, I didn't have to give them all the history, all the background, but here it is, and I'm okay with not giving them everything.
Yeah.
It's a better product. Those tidbits, I used to be like a fan. I'm like, did you know? Blah. Useless. To a novice, probably like, what the hell? Why did you do this to me? Now I have random fact.
Yeah. I mean, I'm like arguably engaging at a bar over a beer with tidbits.
Yes.
But you know, there's a time and a place for that. And maybe a workplace e-learning course is not that place.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I agree. And you know what you said about the honesty or the accuracy of that self-assessment.
Mm-hmm.
I remember when I first started training, the lead lady would say, "Listen, I can skew those Smilo Sheets results if I put out really good cookies at the end of the session."
I bet that's true. I've never thought about it. But
it's true. No, it's true. It worked. It worked. Like people are like machines, conditioned. So if you're having a great lunch, you will have a better experience. Like that's why if a conference has shitty food, it's going to suffer in quality. The sessions are going to be worse quality perceived. It's kind of nuts, but it's that bad. So yes, it's almost like you're rating things, and are you truly aware of that? However, I do see a value if the experience is overwhelmingly negative. Then one of the things that might do is like if you are, let's say the perception is on the majority low, that would not only diminish that person's inclination to take another course with you because they're not impressed, but also probably make them not say nice things about it to others. Because when I had some interviews about why do you take up a learning course or anything, a lot of people say that it is word of mouth. Like if their peer said this was great. And so it's almost like you're trying to manage some sort of a PR piece there on top of getting some kind of quantitative feedback happening, maybe, right? But so it's like there's a balance there.
And I think it's worth taking that quantitative, that's one with numbers, feedback. And like if you have an outlier and it's really low, investigating it.
Mm-hmm.
The right to call out would be great if we can get additional quantitative feedback, especially actionable and useful, which is what Talheimer's book's all about.
Yeah. So good.
I think the whole discussion just had about, essentially a low-level learning metric, and we had it earlier too about like all these performance metrics, brings to mind a book that I know you like and a guy, Daniel Kahneman, and this whole idea of thinking fast and slow. And we have two thinking systems, system 1 and system 2. Oh, wow. That was not practiced, everybody.
Okay. And then I cue and you bring out the book.
But, we can, like you're talking about conferences, like if the cookies are good, so it'll get a good ranking. And obviously that's system 1 substituting an easy answer. So cookies were good for a hard answer. Did I learn?
Yeah.
Or and in the same way with the whole signal and the noise thing, or like, was my learning effective? Well, system one is I got people to complete this course. And then
Yes.
the harder thing is, did it affect performance? So I think that's a constant struggle. And
Yes.
that's no doubt one of the reasons Kahneman's arms reach away from you is he's constantly relevant.
Yes. And also, one of the things that I really did learn is that, actually, speaking of Kahneman, he had that one study where, or maybe probably several, where people are very bad at judging the past, or if they made a wrong decision or they thought something, but then their mind was changed, their mind fills the gaps in saying, yeah, that's what I believed. So one of the ways to overcome that is to have them, through intermittent points, actually capture their ideas and their thinking in that moment, so that when they reflect on it after, so it's almost like you could do a review, but let's say a review, but only in retrospect to other points, other captured feedback that's been done throughout the course.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the end say, okay, so you've had all this kind of learning and feedback. Now that you look at it all, what do you think? Instead of it being an end result.
Right. Like, increases your ability for reflection and metacognition, and to have it actually be accurate.
Yes, and say, oh, look, I actually think that would actually make people see that they've gained value, because if you start out the course believing one thing or something else anyways, and then go back and say, oh, this has changed, that would actually prove to me that there's been value in this process.
I do this little like intro to safety training conference presentation that focuses on not the ANSI Z490.2.
Which sounds like a radio station. So it's like, what is this?
It does, especially when you say it's Z, I like that. But the Z490.1, which is just about EHS training in general. And, I just try to teach them a couple simple things from that national standard. And one is, hey, have a learning objective. And I have them write learning objectives at 3 different times, and then we go through exercises and see examples, and then we do some team writing, and then they keep rewriting it. And by the 3rd or 4th time, and part of what I'm trying to do is retrieval practice and space practice and interleaving. But by the end, they can compare their different versions of the same learning objective, like that they've written 3 or 4 times. I can't recall. And I think it does help to see, like, I really made an appreciable change here. And they're not just at the end of the day saying, like, yeah, I think I got that learning objective thing down.
Or they're like, yeah, of course I could have written this by myself.
Right.
This is the first one. This would have been my first draft.
Exactly.
Okay. How are we doing on time?
Oh, I've got all day. As long as the worst thing that might happen is Bubbles the cat might show up.
Oh, that's awesome. I actually did an interview with Joanna, this copywriter, and she had like cats crisscrossing back. It was awesome. So what do you say to people who are still skeptical of online training, and they argue face-to-face is best because people are together, or that in some cases it's actually preferred by the learner?
Yeah, well, I'll try to tease that apart a couple of times, a couple different ways. I think there are cases where there are learners who prefer online or instructor-led as opposed to online, and there always will be.
Yeah.
Maybe sometimes it'll be case by case, which is fine. I don't think anybody's ever trying to argue for using one training delivery method exclusively. And that's why people always talk about having a variety of learning experiences and blending your learning and everything like that. So we'll always, I think, have people who always want to do instructor-led training instead of online or some other kind of technology-assisted learning. And in addition, there'll always be a time when Anna or Jeff would prefer, instructor for this as opposed to instructor, online for that. But I guess to try to get down, and then the flip side of this is, a lot of times people will say, online sucks or something. But we've all been through all sorts of training of all sorts of delivery methods. That's horrible. Like, no one training delivery method has a monopoly on being bad. And it's easy enough to think of, I'm sure we can all think of a lot of different training experiences we've had that are instructor-led that were horrible. They were passive. It was a lecture. There was a PowerPoint up that did nothing more than lift some bullets. and maybe it was offensive to boot, and the person was rude. And these kind of things happen, or they like we're talking about, they just rambled on and gave me a million unimportant details or whatever. So that nobody has monopoly on good training, no training delivery method, or on bad training. We could probably all think of examples of each. My go-to would be to talk about Dr. Ruth Colvin Clark and her book, Evidence-Based Training Methods, where she makes that basic point. There's no one method that's better than the other. What's important is what you're doing within the training, whether it's instructor-led or e-learning. So are you giving feedback? Are you giving opportunities for practice? Are you using relevant visuals? Those kind of things. That's what's important, not the training delivery method. Dr. Will Thalheimer has a white paper on the exact same topic. It's like a meta survey, and he even shows that e-learning came out ahead as more effective. But he also asterisks that and says that's because these e-learning courses are being created by e-learning developers who understand what these effective learning strategies are. Things like feedback, practice.
Better propensity for success there.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, and then I think there's at least a stereotype that older workers are maybe more resistant to online learning. And maybe that's true, at least in some cases, but I also think that sometimes it's overstated. And obviously it's going to change over time. But again, I'm 52 and I figured out how to use a computer. The American president, I think, is 70 and apparently even knows how to use a mobile phone. So I don't think these skills are quite as inaccessible for the older generation as sometimes we make it out to be. But I'm sure, there are some people who don't like it just because it's not what they grew up with, and that'll change over time. And I guess, these millennials will have to deal with something they didn't grow up with sometime in the future as well.
Yeah. It's funny. I remember when I was when I was teaching or designing the remote course for the apprenticeship electrical guys, everybody said that electricians don't learn online. Like that they're like a separate race of people that is unable to. And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, it just like, how can you lump people in these categories like that, right? And it's funny when you say, social media and the use of it. Stan Lee used Twitter till he died, and then
Right.
And he's still using it, even though he's dead already for some reason.
I heard you say that. I had to check that out. That was weird.
It's weird. I don't like it. I don't like how there's continuance. Like his voice is gone. Let him be. And then this is the other thing, though. I find that we might be almost causing a disservice to millennials, Gen Z, is that it's like we're saying that they should just be so savvy. And it's almost like we're ignoring, there's gaps. Like I'll work with students at the university, and they don't know how to use the office tools. They don't know how to use collaboration tools. So it's almost like we're assuming that they don't need to be taught these things. They still do. I think the only difference is that they're just more public about their lives on social media, but the skill set to use the tools effectively and all those things, like we introduce Zoom sessions to like 50 students. They're all still going, where's the chat? So it's everybody's on the same, I think, level. It's just the resistance is the growth is different for different people.
Well, I think good point. I think in general, all these things we hear about how millennials are different and universally different and as a block are mistaken. And a little off point, but I also have surveys and studies I've read show they often really value one-on-one instruction and mentorship.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, they grew up in a world where they had much more access to computers and mobile phones and everything, and there's a certain expectation. But I would imagine every generation as they're moving into the workforce is not used to the tools of the workforce, even if they happen to be computer-based tools. And it would make sense that, I don't know how to use the Office suite or certain collaborative software. And every time my company gets a new piece of software, I got to figure out where the button is too. Like I don't magically know where the chat button is, or like, I know how to use Zoom now, which is why I'm talking to you, but I didn't know how to use Zoom the first time and I got nervous, So yeah, I think it's a good point that even if we have this sense that the millennials are all tech savants, they don't know everything there is to know about every software program. It's
Yeah.
hard to keep up with all this stuff. There's a lot of change. And again, that's why I think it's really important. A 21st century job skill is learning how to learn and how to relearn constantly. Be a lifelong learner.
Yeah, I agree. And that is like, that's, if you can just hone that, that's your, like, you are unstoppable.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're forever relevant. So
Exactly.
So you've mentioned a bunch of resources already in books, but what's your favorite resource for personal learning?
Is personal learning meaning how I try to make myself better in my career? Is that what you mean by that?
Sure. Or how you're like, oh, this is a cool thing I want to pick up, do my spare time. How do you do?
Okay, so in my career, it's books, and more importantly, the internet, because the internet's so easy, right? And there are all these people who share so much information on the internet, but yourself included, Kathy Moore, all the people I've already talked about today. I don't do as good a job so I go to all those people's blogs I just talked about, and you can go to the Convergence Training blog and you will find an endless list of links to all those all the people I learned from. I don't do as good a job as I could of like going to places like the e-learning guild or something. And maybe I should do that more, but I don't. I do get it. Obviously, I still like books. I even buy books that are not electronic. So I buy books made out of paper, and I still find that to be a great joy.
I do too.
Apparently, because I saw one right over there.
I love my Kindle. I love the immediacy of it, but there's capturing notes, and it's different. I'll have sometimes books in both forms.
The Kindle has some great advantages because I can easily click on that word, get a definition, which I was never going to look up in a paper-based dictionary.
Yeah, you're right.
Find the whole history of that person. So there are benefits to both. And then I like conferences and I learn at conferences. I don't get to go to as many as I wish I could, but that's a great opportunity. But yeah, I've learned a ton, like just from people like yourself. And I guess this is where like that idea of like working out loud comes in social networking, who've been kind enough just to share endless amounts of information with me. And that's true in the training world. It's true in all the safety people, all the training people I talked about. But in safety, people like Ron Gant, Todd Conklin, all sorts of safety experts in this kind of new field called HOP or Safety 2. Everyone's just been amazingly free with trying to teach others up. And I've benefited greatly from that. So, if I started learning from Mark Lutwack and Y. York, I'm continuing today with Anna Abramowitz and Todd
Conklin. Cool.
Then, I guess my personal learning thing, I think, I've been taking online lessons from Fender to play guitar.
That's awesome.
It's been fun. And it's, as an instructional designer, it's interesting to like evaluate what they're doing and check out its effectiveness. So that's been a lot of fun. And then I still need to get into an expert and start taking lessons and get some more focused criticism, and feedback. But the Fender Online thing's been really a fun addition to my life lately.
Cool. Have you ever checked out any masterclass stuff?
I haven't. Is this the stuff like Malcolm Gladwell talking about storytelling and Werner Herzog talking about movie making?
Yes.
Have you been doing
that? Yes. Aaron Sorkin.
Wow.
Yeah. So cool.
I'd like to. And then, I'd even like to take some of these courses from online places like any number of them. I can't remember the name of any of them, but learn skills for your job. I am looking also into just taking a online master's from Boise State, which, again, I never got a degree in my field, so that's another way I was thinking of improving my game.
Mm-hmm. I actually have heard very good things about Boise State, to be honest with you. I've heard about Boise State actually offering things online that people are taking in Europe because it's that good.
Oh, good. Thank you.
So,
Yeah.
There you go. And I think I think we're gonna get like a membership to MasterClass. It's $250, unlimited courses. And listen, if you can cook and with like Gordon Ramsay and sing with Christina Aguilera, why not?
Why not?
But it's so funny that you said you're like, yes, I'm taking this course for my guitar, but I'm also looking at his course structure and evaluating it because you can't turn it off. I wonder if I could use this. I'm always doing that. I'm like, this is a good strategy. How do they do that?
Yeah.
That's part of the job, right? You just can't turn it off.
Right.
Okay, so what is the book that you initially dismissed, but then suddenly just resonated later with you as you gained experience?
Yeah, I saw this question because first of all, I'm really guilty of this kind of stuff, like just out of hand dismissing things, and that was more so when I was younger, and it was most of it was entirely focused around everything pop culture. Because I was snobby, but I tried not to do that quite so much. I couldn't think of a book or something that I had dismissed, but I really struggled with and didn't bond with the safety experts I'm telling you about, the people who were writing about HOP, safety differently, and safety too. And in particular, I'd call out the guy who I think is arguably most active on LinkedIn, is this guy named Ron Gant. And I followed him, and it was just counterintuitive. I mean, it is just counterintuitive. And like for example, your safety incident rate is not important, and I was like, that's counterintuitive. How could that be? So he intrigued me, but I didn't buy in for a long time. And I don't really recall that I bought in fully until I was lucky enough to see him at a conference. But over time, I've been quite persuaded and influenced by all these thinkers: Todd Conklin, Rod Gant, Sidney Decker, Eric Hollnagel, a guy named Carsten Busch. So maybe I never dismissed them, but they certainly had me scratching my head for a long time. And then it did grow to resonate with me over time.
So do you think that it just, is it repeated exposure, or do you think that was a part of it?
I'm nodding because it's a great question, not because I know the answer. I don't know. You put me on the spot there. It's a really good question. I'll try to have an answer for you next time, huh?
No problem. I think it is a part of that. For me, it is a repeated exposure, but also as it's kind of neat because it's like a little, like let's say you're faced with something, you get an idea, and it's totally not in your realm of consideration. But all of a sudden in that prism, now you have this extra perspective, and you can maybe once in a while, glimpse it and then maybe see more opportunities. Like, remember how you said that you read that book, the one about by Erickson, I think?
Yeah, the peak performance book.
Yeah. And now you're seeing books all over the place and reviews about it, right? And it's probably because of that what is it called? There's a word for it. It's like,
yeah. I don't know the word for it, but I know it's a known phenomenon, and I know I do it a lot. Like once I've noticed this one thing, I see it everywhere.
Right, you buy a red Jeep, and now you see all the, So it's gonna come to 3 a.m. and be like, it's that thing. Yes. So so all of a sudden there's an idea that you've never seen before because you've never actually looked for it before.
Right.
And now you can see it. Anyways, that's really cool because I think that it takes guts to continue saying things that is not mainstream and just not give up.
Yeah. Well, I definitely have had that experience you were talking about where you just kind of, it's over there in the margins, and suddenly you get a little window into it, but not a complete understanding. And I think that's true with HOP and safety differently, and I know that experience in general. And off topic, but one of the things I love about talking with you, because we do this a lot, is there's always like a mutual leaning over and writing notes of other people's names in books, which you do and I do both. And like, again, this is a great learning experience for me. This is the kind of thing, like, I'll have this conversation with you, and then I'll go out and get a book, and 6 months later I will have read that and integrated it with something that maybe Ron Gant said, and it's just a kind of endless, productive learning cycle.
That's awesome. Thanks for saying that.
Yeah, so thank you.
So, okay, so the other thing, oh boy, look at this. I just noticed this is open. This is great. It's my eucalyptus tree hanging thing. Oh, sorry, hold on.
No problem.
There we go. That's my tech closet. Keyboards.
Oh, yeah.
Let's not even talk about that. Okay, that's my New Year's resolution that needs to go. That's my projects that dispel my energy to focus on the most important thing.
You just made me feel better because mine is a little bin in the garage, and I was feeling, which I haven't touched in 10 years, and I still have. But it's not a closet.
Okay.
Go, Anna, go. You can do it.
I'm gonna have to watch that series that came out on Netflix with Marie Kondo.
Another series.
What?
The Declutter Your House series.
Yeah, it was Marie Kondo, where you have to look at each object and say, does this bring me joy? If not, I gotta throw it away. That's like 90% of your house, man.
It's almost like taking the manufacturing process of 5S from lean manufacturing and applying it to your workplace, your home.
Oh yeah, 5S. I am not familiar with 5S. I mean, I did quality. I have a quality assurance certificate, but it's like 10 years old now.
You're gonna want to write that down on your little notepad over here. I'll send you a link. It's like lean manufacturing 101.
Five Sigma. Is it 5 Sigma?
No, that's different actually.
Oh, that's 6 Sigma.
Yeah, and that's more related to quality.
Okay. All right. Got to write it down. I'll look it up.
Okay.
All right. Okay. So, okay, this one, I like hearing this one a lot. So what was the most impactful lesson that you've learned over your career?
Yeah, I gave this some thought. I think it was shut up and listen and learn from other people. And maybe segues back into this empathy thing. I think I was pretty headstrong and self-convinced when I was young. Ironic, since I was in a field I knew nothing about. And there's a term for that too, the dunning, whatever. But I think I had a lot of that confidence born of knowing nothing. And so I'd like to believe as I've gotten older, I've gotten better about that. I think parenting helped with that too. I became a stepdad when my daughters were 12, which is kind of like jumping in the deep end.
Oh yeah. Wow.
Yeah. And you don't get 12 years of training. You're just the dad of teens.
Oh, that's harsh, man. Wow.
And very quickly, at least I realized I have no idea what I'm doing. So it was just really helpful just to ask the girls, like, well, what should I be doing here? So that process helped too.
Wow. It's kind of neat how you become more, it's like that whole Aristotle thing that the more I know, the less I know and understand, and I should be asking even more questions. It's just interesting how that happens over time. But
yeah. Which again, great lesson for a learning developer, right? How can I help you, the learner?
Yeah.
How can I be more humble?
Totally. So if someone wants to get in touch with you or learn more about your work, where should they go? What should they do? What do you hear? I
write a blog where I talk about these kind of things at Convergence Training. I don't know if it's convergencetraining.com/blog or the other way, but there's a link in the top right.
And I'll put it underneath the video too.
But should I say again?
I'll put it underneath the video too.
Okay, thank you. I'm on LinkedIn. That's probably the easiest way to find me on social media. And then I speak here and there at various conferences. And I love it when people reach out. So, where LinkedIn, the blog are probably the easiest places, probably LinkedIn, frankly.
Yeah.
But I love getting anything, like even if it's just my mom, I'll be excited. She probably writes most about my stuff.
That's it's actually given in our field for some reason, even though I find that even my mom has no idea what I do really. I mean, really what I do. She thinks that I work in front of the computer, has no clue what I'm doing.
But she's proud of you nonetheless, Anna.
She is proud of me. I know that. She tells me every day. Sends me a text message. So, did you want to continue?
Yeah. Do you want to flip roles here and have me introduce you? And if we want to, we can cut these up or do it separately and just ask you some questions about story-based learning and scenarios.
If you want to, yes, definitely. And also, I will probably just run this exactly as is on the podcast.
I may not bore people at Convergence Training with a bunch of stuff about myself, but yeah, I'd love to ask you a couple questions, kind of as a follow-up to our earlier discussions on story-based training and scenario-based training that we had that kind of like were more general in nature.
Okay. That's awesome.
Cool. So, we talked already a couple times today about working with subject matter experts in order to create a scenario-based learning or story-based learning. And I wondered if you could talk to us about some of the challenges of working with a subject matter expert in order to create that meaningful scenario and the possible answers and the feedback and the consequence and everything.
So this is like, I love this topic because I did this survey probably 5 years ago, and the survey had like 200 responses, and the word SME came up in 100 of them. It's insane how intense this topic is. And about 5 years back or so, I was at Learning Solutions. I did a presentation on this very topic, just how to work well with a subject matter expert. And part of my research was looking at what is already out there as far as how to work with subject matter experts. And I found a common thread, which is that the language that we use around introducing people that come onto our projects to our subject matter experts is extremely negative. Like, it is bad. Like the way we Huh?
How to manage and control your SME.
Yes, like there's some sort of this weird entity that like out to get you, right? And it's like they're just humans trying to do their job really well, and they're doing it so well that they get picked for these projects, which actually ends up being a curse, right? Because you're like, oh, I'm trying to do a good job, and then I get all distracted by these people trying to put these things together. And so I feel like what's happening is we've created the stigma around a SME. And when you enter a relationship, any relationship with this person's going to be difficult mindset. They're going to be difficult because that's what you expect, and that's what you're going to help happen, right? So for me, that's huge. Language is very important, and it's not about what you say; it's about what you think. So if you're thinking it's going to manifest. That's what I believe. So then the other thing that I really promote, because I think the other question I get is, how do I get the SME to give me all the info that I need? They never give me good info. They don't get it. They don't, especially if you're trying to put together like something like engaging story. And they're like, they don't know how to do that. And I'm like, oh, of course they don't. They're an expert in like the super widget. Like, they've never done this before. So, I think that the challenge is that a lot of us come in with our domain, we live in it, we breathe it, and then this person that has no interest, clue, whatever, they're brought in, and we think we have to like educate them on the inner workings of how we do stuff, inner workings of how e-learning works, inner workings of software phase cycles. No, just let go of all that. Ask them really good questions that they would understand without having any inner insider knowledge of whatever you do in the background. And then your job is to translate that into the e-learning without them feeling the pain of it. That's how I feel. So I say this was my, make them a part of the product, not the process.
There's got to be a general team dynamics thing going here, because I feel like everything you just said about how an instructional designer can work with a SME, I could have just said about how a safety manager can work with a frontline worker. You know, like they're not the problem. They don't need to be controlled. You don't have to complain about them. And the important thing is not telling them what to do, but asking the right questions.
Yeah. Yeah, like they're your ally. There's a rivalry sometimes going on. Like, you're trying to wreck my project. You don't want to be helpful. And yes, and I know that that does happen. There are people who are very guarded with their knowledge. But I find that if you approach it, like you said, with empathy and humbleness, most people warm up to that, especially if you're bringing a cup of coffee, because coffee is warm, and warm stimulates the heart. It actually is psychologically proven to inspire people to feel better towards you. Don't bring them cold drinks.
That's a low cost of entrance. That's pretty good.
Totally. Cookies too.
Yeah, and they'll give you a good 5-star rating. So what are those good questions then? What are some good questions to ask a SME?
A good question. Okay, so Okay, one of the problems that happens is when we when we have a conversation with a subject matter expert, we're coming at them from a learning perspective. So we'll ask them learning type questions. And we talked about this before, just because you're an expert in your field doesn't make you a good teacher or coach. Right. So that's why we get crappy information back, is because they haven't thought about it in that context yet. So you want to start it off, like when I talk to people, I talk to them as if, I know this sounds bad, but I talk to them like they're my mom. Like I'm trying to get my mom's expertise out of her brain without having to just do all this stuff back here, right? So then I'll say something like, tell me the last time you were in this kind of situation. Oh yeah, and what happened then? Oh yeah, well, why would somebody think that? Why is a huge part of my process. I've been in interviews where I have another instructional designer sitting across from me and we're interviewing like a subject matter expert. Mm-hmm. And I'll ask why like 3 times in a row. And this person would just like glare at me. They're like, what's wrong with you? Right? Like, because they're getting bored. Because they're like, why are you asking another why? But the person who is the subject matter expert, they're excited that you're asking them the reasons why something is happening. And they actually don't ever notice that you've gone down the route of why 5 times. They'll actually just keep on thinking. The minute you ask somebody a question, right, they have this, it's a psychological urge. They want to answer it. So if you're asking them, I think we're self-conscious that we're asking those kinds of questions to dig deep. But if you ask just that opening one, like, tell me a time where this actually happened, where you saw somebody really make a mistake, or where it didn't work out the way you wanted it to. And then they give you an answer, and then you go, why? And that's creates the fodder for all your scenarios. You come up with awesome consequences. And you just, like, how you said, like the biggest skill is shut up and listen. Yeah. This is what I learned. I used to ask a question, and then I'd go, if you just ask the question and then just wait past the uncomfortable silence, give them a chance to formulate, that's gold. And just wait and shut up.
Yeah. I do that. That's a lesson I learned in instructor training too. I'm sure you know that the 5 whys is kind of a big question problem solving technique in quality and manufacturing. I love that. I
didn't know it was in quality and manufacturing. I just thought it was, I read Ken Wanatabi's book on problem solving, and
I admit I don't know the origins, but it's used in manufacturing and quality.
Japanese, yeah.
Safety as well. And then I love the fact that, and it makes sense. Like if you ask somebody, a subject matter expert, why about what they do, they're passionate because there's a reason they're good at it. That's what they do. People do tend to like to talk about what interests them. But I love in particular your questions are open-ended, and they're asking for specific situations, and then just kind of letting the person tell you. So then if what else do you do is with SMEs? Is it in terms of asking them questions? Is that it?
No. What happens is I'll get them to tell me, and there's a difference in subject matter experts. And the difference for me is there's a subject matter expert who's an expert in the process, and there's a subject matter expert who is a top performer. And those two people have different perspectives. Sometimes they speak a different language. And also, this is one of the things you have to be careful of. The subject matter expert sometimes has never been the top in that field. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Like the guy who's teaching you sales, it may not have ever sold a vacuum in his life. Right. He just knows you know what I mean? So the stories sometimes are very hard to get out of the subject matter expert who's never had a story. Yeah. He just knows the right answer. So you might want to engage different people at different points. So you might want to talk to the top performer to get the stories and the mindsets and what are you thinking, where are you messing up? And then after you take their transcript and build it out into some demos, then you take it back to the expert in process and procedures and saying, where's the gaps? right?
Mhm.
Because those two need to marry. But I try to talk to those two kinds of people always, because you discover different things. Like one of the I worked with Rubbermaid, and it was their top salespeople. They were implementing a new sales process. They had this 5-step sales process that every sales rep should follow. And what became evident, and they were like, they're not, we're launching this thing and they're skipping a step or something because the people who are following all these steps are getting sales. And then I talked to the top, and it was just an hour. That's all I needed, is an hour with the top 2 people in the country. And I said, okay, walk me through your day. What is that? I didn't ask anything about the 5-step process. I didn't ask anything about the procedure. I said, tell me what your day looks like and what do you do before you get into the call and when you are in with a person. And what you realized is that, yeah, they were doing that 5-step stuff, but the majority of their day or of their call or with that meeting with that person was them just like making small talk and listening to their challenges. It was all the best salespeople were the best listeners. Yeah. It wasn't them going through the checklist. So if I just talked to the expert, I would have created something that was just very removed from reality. Because the fact that was most of it, like you really probably could have skipped that 5-step process and just listened to your person. They buy from people that they trust and know and like. And who do you like? People who listen to you, people who care about you, people who remember your children's names, all those things, right?
Right.
That's what it was. So, so I suggest the conversations don't have to be very long. Your questions are just there to open up that dialogue. And then you can just come back to the SME, the top expert, after talking to them probably for 45 minutes or an hour, with those ideas drafted to make sure that they work.
That's a good tip. I love, of course, that we're back to listening once again. And empathy. In addition to talking to your process expert, the person who kind of knows it in theory, and then your job performance expert, your peak performer, do you ever, sometimes when each of those people have some level of expertise, do you ever run into what they sometimes, I think in Made to Stick, they call the curse of knowledge, where those people just know so much they don't know all the steps to it? Do you ever talk to like a novice as well?
Yes, but not as often as I'd like to.
Yeah.
To be honest with you. And you're right. The curse of knowledge is, the whys help with the curse of knowledge a lot.
Yeah, you're breaking that down.
Yeah. And like, the reasoning behind something, a lot of people are just like, yeah, I've been doing this for years. And they don't actually think about the reason why they do that anymore. Although that's easier to discover with the why than a procedural thing, mental steps that you take that you've now compressed into a single step. That's much harder. So yes, and I feel what you can do is this stays a part of that humbleness and empathy pieces. You represent the learner, so I try to be as ignorant as possible about the process. And I know that's probably hard for somebody in your position because you've been there for years. You've seen the different courses. You've seen what works, what doesn't, right? So it's almost like you have to shut that off and say, okay, no, I know nothing.
You apparently would be surprised at how easy it is for me to be ignorant. Yes.
No, but you,
it is.
Yeah. But if you can come in being the novice, you can solve a lot of those questions. Like it's funny because I've talked to people and I said, yeah, just come in and ask all the dumb questions because you don't know. And everybody's like, yeah, but I don't want to look dumb. That's, you got to drop your ego there. And I'm like, that's exactly how you got to look.
Yes.
And it's got nothing to do with you, and nobody's going to be impressed because there's no way you can fool yourself into thinking that you could somehow be an expert after reading a single module or reading a manual and then coming in with this guy who's been doing it for 20 years. And now I'm trying to look good that I know my stuff. No, I don't. None of that matters to me.
I get the point, and it's a good thing to discuss. I've never had a subject matter expert think I was stupid because I asked questions about his or her job, which is.
I know, that's all you think, right? You think that. They don't think that.
Right, no, yeah, and so you just need to banish that. And again, I just think they're more than happy to tell you about their job. It's what's the field they chose to go into. I'll talk your ear off about instructional design. I'm doing enough.
I'm loving it.
Okay, so if that's discussing with SMEs, do you have more to say about SMEs, or should we move on to the alternatives when you're creating a scenario-based learning exercise?
No, that's it. That's what I had to say about SMEs. But what do you think? What has been your experience in this area? This is a big topic. A lot of people struggle with this.
Yeah. I think you're right. Because I do think you want to talk to people who know how to do it well, but I do think they're also not going to be able to clearly articulate why they do it well, because a lot of it's they've moved into automaticity and they do it without thinking and everything. And that's why I do think coming in and asking those questions and asking them kind of something like a 5 why, you probably will get kind of a more esoteric or more superficial answer or indirect answer that first time. That's not going to break down the real learning nugget there. And it's really difficult to put yourself back into the footstep or shoes of a novice learner as an expert learner. So, which is why I called out that do you ever get to talk with a novice as well?
Yeah.
But that seems like a logical, I mean, it's great that you're working with both sides, the kind of theoretical person and the actual job performance person. And then I think you're doing the right thing to try to like identify what's really going on. Like why do things really work well, which is chatting up a potential sale about his or her kid and listening to his or her problem at work, more so than checklist item number 3.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. Sorry, it was about the subject matter experts. I just lost the idea. It's okay. Sorry.
It'll come back.
Yeah, 3 a.m. It'll be top of mind.
All right. So the reason you're talking to these subject matter experts in your case is because you want to create compelling stories, and in particular, present a learner with a scenario where they have to make a decision or perform an action. And so, which means, especially an e-learning developer, you're going to have to kind of pre-script a certain number of alternatives. So how do you go about creating the right alternative actions for that learner in scenario A or scenario B?
So I think this point really messes people up because when you think of scenario in context, you think that it means reality. And when you talk to or that your scenario is supposed to be like reality, right? That it's supposed to simulate all options. And it's actually funny because in most real life, you only have mostly 2 options. It's take action or not take action most times. That's or A or B. When I give you 3 options, that's actually luxury, right? So that's so the other thing that you have to think about is when I design a scenario, I'm not trying to make that person feel like this is them, this is their life, and these are all the options that are available to them. What I'm trying to do with a story is constrain it to a single person who has only these available options to them because of either their mindset at that point, even that's all they see as an option, or that their circumstance allows them to only have these options. Mm-hmm. And the options themselves, which a lot of people struggle with coming up with valuable ones, all you have to do is at the very base, just say, what are the top 3 common mistakes? And when you say mistakes, they don't have to be manifested in action. They can be a mindset mistake. Like, what are my assumptions? What am I thinking that drives me to make the wrong decision? So it's funny because sometimes you can actually make the same decision, but with the wrong mindset, it's a different outcome because you perceive it differently, or something happens that is not the way that it should be. So So for me, it's like, that's why those stories, talking to subject matter experts to discover the whys behind their decision making is very important, because then the consequences are driven by their mindset at that point.
Mm-hmm.
So I hope that answers your question.
Well, are you getting, so those, I'm glad you mentioned, like, well, one of the things I try to do along with presenting maybe a great answer or a good answer or something is to, some common errors. Are you extracting those common errors from your discussions with your subject matter experts as well?
Yes, always. Because if I have to come up with a distractor or whatever, it's always going to be BS. It's never going to be relevant enough. You have to be almost in that position to know what is actually a really contentious issue, because one of the things that you want to do with those distractors is to make each one of them so powerful to somebody who doesn't know that they're all looking valid. And in fact, when I go through training and I have those, when I see a question like that where I'm stuck, I'm like, oh man, somebody did such a great job, because I'm actually having trouble choosing. This is so good. Like, I know I'm going to learn, So, yeah.
Okay, good. All right. So you set these scenarios into stories. The stories lead to the scenarios, and you have expertise, I think, in storytelling in general, and using storytelling in training. And are there like models that have worked for you for presenting stories and creating, to use our buzzword, engaging stories that help set up that scenario?
Yes. So, and I know you're a Joseph Campbell fan, so he's on my bookshelf over there too. But okay, so there are like, if you look at the story universe, there are patterns and story patterns. However, if you go down that route, that one of the scariest thing is that's a rabbit hole that could take you another lifetime to explore as far as what is engaging. So one of the things that, and I learned this from my partner Ryan, is that you can, and he's done a lot of work with this, and I've learned a lot of it from him as well. That what if you can have, like, let's say, distill your stories down to that 20% that's going to have the most impact, because stories can get very complicated. That if you stick to these, let's say, two things, that that you will have the propensity of your training to actually be more successful as a story will be better. So one of the things is transformation. So if you have if the person who's going through your story is a part of a transformation for a character in your story, there's an outcome for that person, then there is a propensity that they'll want to finish it. They'll care about the decisions that they're making, because they want to see that outcome come to life. So that's one thing, but that alone, it does not guarantee success. And actually, there's a lot of stories where, or even e-learning, whatever, where you start off and you're like, Jimmy has a goal. The goal is to save the princess, right? And at the end, he saves the princess. And I don't care that Jimmy saves the princess. There's a reason why I don't care. It's because you haven't made me care about Jimmy first. Right. And I don't know if you've seen that movie yet, the Bandersnatch.
Not yet after the last time you mentioned it, but it is now officially on my list.
Okay, all right. So the movie itself was fabulous because it's a scenario-driven movie where you make decisions, and it's actually quite, you would consider that it would actually be quite engaging, because you are making decisions in a cinematic experience that reflect in real life, and people actually act on the things that you choose, which has a fleeting, engaging piece.
Yep.
But after a while, at the end of that movie, I said, okay, so I was making a decision on behalf of a character. A movie on my TV screen played out the things that I wanted it to do, but it failed for me. Why did it fail? I saw the transformation of that person, and they achieved their goal. I actually went down a path that was hidden by Netflix, which is pretty cool. I feel smart. I found an Easter egg. That's great. However, I didn't care about the character because there was no setup. So and people say that, they're like, how do I make it engaging for everybody? how do I create a general enough scenario that people will be interested in it? And it's funny because what seems intuitive is actually the very opposite of what we should be doing, which is to create a very detailed character, set up the reason why we like them or not, like little details like this person lost their mom when they were little. Their mom made them a little bunny out of old socks, and this guy is now 23. He still has that bunny because he misses his mother, and he has he struggles in school. He's bullied because he's different and he can't socially adjust. All those things that stack up to make somebody a human and somebody care. If you take the investment up front to design your story to actually have this person first explain the mundane world, as Ryan calls it, the mundane world, set it up, and then what happens is then that transformation means something because you care about them. If there's a transformation, it's nothing if you don't care about why that person's transforming. So those two things are huge. And then there are other levels, like you probably know about this, that Pixar uses, and it's not just Pixar, movies use that story beats, right? Where this happens, so this happens, and then this happened, but then what happened is this difficulty came up, and this happened. So there's actually a formula. You can actually Google it. It's online, which not only, and I think this is actually on Khan Academy. They have a Pixar module. I don't know what it's under. It just seemed like it was so out of place to be on the Khan Academy, but they have a little Pixar tutorial, and they walk you through this process. Now, one of the things that, and I know I'm rambling here about this thing, but it's not that this is magic in any way, because there is a formula, but what's good to see is that the people who design these great stories and follow this formula, they still iterate on it, like, and they test, like they are always like going back to somebody, hey, can you look at this? Is this cool? Is this interesting to you? Like those things, like you can't do this stuff in isolation. Like you really have to just get people's feedback.
So if I can try to summarize that, it seems like thing one, according to you, is make a character that people care about.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
And then, and it seems like, so a common error, talking to a subject matter expert like yourself, one common error would be, I might try to make a completely generic character so that he or she is completely generic to all audiences. But that's not what works. What works is being concrete and specific and using detail. Because, for example, in Breaking Bad, we find Walt interesting, not because he's kind of an average white guy who's middle-aged, because he has all these interesting, specific parts of his personality, right?
Yes.
So that's what we want to capture, is that the real human, not the generic human, correct?
Yeah, if we didn't know anything about his backstory, about his wife and his inner struggle to be like
Cancer and his love of science and
all those things that everybody thinks, like, okay, remember we talked about how you throw in little nuggets of stuff into, a module just to keep it interesting. You save all that for the setup of the story.
right.
And build it up there, and then that's it's almost like if Pixar takes 11 minutes out of every single movie to set up the mundane life, set up why this person even wants to go anywhere, why does John want to be the best sales guy, and if you realize that the psychological journey for him is not just because he wants to make the most money, but because his wife's having a baby, this is their second baby, he wants to be the best dad because his dad left him when he was little, and he doesn't want to repeat that thing. Like, you find all those reasons why somebody wants to be there. I want to help John make the best damn sale ever. I want him to be number one because I resonate with that, with his goals. So.
Right. So then to go to the third thing you talked about is the Pixar thing. And the Pixar thing, I think if we can condense it, is this character I like gets a challenge. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Basically.
Yeah, there has to be an obstacle. There has to be something in their way. If it's hunky-dory, then, and it's funny because I've seen this a lot where they're like, hey, join Jim on his first day at work. Can you help Jim be great at work? And you're like, yeah, but Jim's great. What's the point? Okay, well, why does he need me? So
Yeah.
Jim's socially awkward and he has a limp or a lisp and he's terrified of talking to people, whatever, like I think it's you gotta have so much fun with this stuff.
And then meeting that challenge, this interesting character meets a challenge and he or she succeeds, and that's going to lead to a transformation. Could you give us some examples in like real world, like job training, what that transformation would be?
Yes. So the transformation is like we've done leadership training with Adidas, and the transformation was that it wasn't manifested in the person necessarily themselves. In leadership training, what we had is basically their premise was that what we wanted the new leaders to do is not necessarily, because there's leaders all over the world in this organization, and we're not going to have the same situation for each one. But the major premise was that a good leader will look at their environment and see opportunities to enact these small leadership actions and enable their people. They'll find opportunities to do that instead of just saying, this is how we're doing things, right? So what happened is, as this person moved, like they were placed in different situations saying, what should you do? Tell them how to do it, provide encouragement or provide feedback, whatever. And as they moved through, what they saw, what changed was the environment around them and the kinds of ideas people were coming to them with now because they felt they could. So the transformation was not necessarily of what I was doing, but the environment around me was changing as a result of these small actions that I took, which then later the character actually, we made it explicit that they reflected on the difference between when they started and when they finished the journey, if they went down the path of leadership.
Great. I like the idea. I just not that long ago read that Not Made to Stick, which is the book by the Heath brothers, but Make It Stick, which is a book about what they call desirable difficulties. And that idea of space practice, what you're doing in that course, and then coming at things from different perspectives repeatedly and building up a mental model and making it, and really that's where you're starting to develop expertise. And I think that book, Make It Stick, segues really nicely with the Eric Anders book about building expertise, because they really talk, at that point, they talk about the same thing, which is like space practice, but throwing things at me in different perspectives and increasing my learning over time. Which, and I don't care if you do scenario-based training, live, or if you do it e-learning.
Yeah,
that's a great use for e-learning there. That maybe isn't as easy to do on to scale in instructor-led training.
Mm-hmm. I actually would just love to see people reuse the live scenarios into the e-learning and back and forth. Like I read that book, Principles by Ray Dalio. It's a great book. He's so logical, and he's got all these systems. It's a really cool book. But one of the things that they did is I'm thinking that organizational wise, this is so smart. There was, I guess, two managers who there was some sort of a personal issue, and one of them handled it with that person. And then the other manager completely disagreed with their approach. They both approached, I think, Ray and said, we're both right? Both of them felt where they were like 100% right. And Ray didn't know, he didn't want to take sides. So what he did is he actually took that scenario and sent it out to the entire company. And everybody, and then they had, what was wonderful, because that's what scenarios can do. It's like, here's the situation, here's what happened, here's the outcome. Now let's talk about this. Is this the way we do business, right? Is this the way we deal with people? Is this, so if you have all these variables, is this the right decision to make? And I love that. And I was like, man, this guy's like a scenario genius, right? If Ray's using scenarios, I'm in the right track.
I like that idea of crowdsourcing the answer to the broader audience. And I also like that, there's at least a little focus about learning how work really is done in that context.
Yeah.
That's big in safety. They refer to it as the black and blue line, and there's work is imagined and work is done. And
yes.
Lines are different lines. And again, we really should be maybe facilitating that work is done. Okay, great. Well, so we got this story-based model that work, and I think I took your precautionary tale there, like don't get too caught up in trying to do the hero's journey tale or something like that from Joseph Campbell.
Oh, there's so many levels to that, because then there's an obstacle and then you're doing okay, and then there's another obstacle where you lose it all and that's it, and then you have to. So good stories, yes.
Keep it simple. Have an interesting character who I care about, a challenge, and let them make a transformation. So
yeah.
This scenario, that story is going to set up a scenario where I, as a learner, have to do something. So how does that fit in?
Well, I think that the scenario, like if you look at like the purpose, I think, of stories, period, right? Stories are meant to capture history, but also capture lessons from people. Like Aesop's fables, like, and the way we process information. I mean, we're trying to put random words into a narrative that we can remember, and it teaches us something. So all you're doing really is, all I'm doing is I'm taking an Aesop's fable, which is compelling, interesting, and all that stuff, and then adding a level of decision that allows me to explore alternatives based on my level of experience without killing people in real life, you know? Right. And also what it allows me to do is it allows me to see those decisions in context. Like, I think a lot of times the reason our learning is slow is because, one, the decision point is isolated from all the other things that I have to do, or I make a decision and I don't see the consequence of that decision because the lesson comes so late. I don't have I don't have the reflection process even to catch it. Be like, oh, you know how I've been smoking for 40 years now? That's why I have cancer. Oh, you know.
But that's a great example.
Thanks. Yes. No, I think it was Jim Rohn said that. He just said that if we all got lung cancer the day after we started smoking, nobody would start smoking anymore, because the consequences is delayed, we continue making the same errors. So in fact, scenarios to me are a way to bring that closer, compress that time, and make it like in your face. Like you forgot to latch something, and 6 months later somebody's face got crushed. Mm-hmm. But you weren't there, right? So sometimes you don't catch those things. So it's easier to amp up things. And like I said, if you can, and the narrative, the other thing is the narrative that you're now putting these decisions in helps you remember it, because it's a story.
Yeah, that's exactly. Yeah. I had a question.
You have sun. I'm so jealous.
It'll come your way, I promise. But yeah.
Eventually.
We had been socked in with fog for the last couple of days, so this is unusual. But
that's lovely.
So I know one of the reasons you like to use these scenarios is to kind of point out to the learner like a gap that they have. Can you talk about that a little bit?
So this has been something that has changed a little bit in my mind as I've worked with people, because I'll work with companies, and they have like amazing, since like they've been developing repositories of amazing training for a decade, let's say. And it's funny because they feel like that's the fact that they have this repository, somehow it is a disadvantage because it's outdated or something. And I'm like, the top people in your workplace use that stuff to be where they are. So it's not that bad. There's nothing wrong with it. It's actually pretty awesome. The only thing is, maybe it's not as, maybe the only difference between people accessing it now is because now they're distracted by all kinds of stuff. They need more context as to why they should even access it. So I'm thinking scenarios really are not there to replace the awesome training you already have, the performance tools you already have, the webinars you've already done. It's just there to help somebody who thinks they know everything because they're coming in because they looked it up on YouTube, to be like, okay, well, yeah, show me. I'll see if I can make the right decision here. And then when they get the outcome they didn't anticipate, they now know that they have a gap, And then your job is to make sure that the minute that gap is perceived and they're in that high state of, hell, I got to figure out what I'm doing because I thought this was going to turn out different. Your job is to make sure that that resource is ready for them so they can devour it because they're hungry and ready for it then. So your job is to kind of create that gap awareness, get them like they're primed to learn at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think where most of us fail is we create something awesome, they're primed, and then we don't have anything to be like, here it is, here's the next step, go for it, get ready, upskill.
So two things I like about that. One is the Heath brothers in that book Made to Stick talk about the importance of surprise, and I think you're in that what you just described. The scenario is bringing an element of surprise to me, the learner, that I have a gap that I didn't know.
Yeah.
And then I love what you're thinking about. Like I think we tend to sometimes think about training either an activity or a session or what as a one and done kind of thing. And ideally, it's planned out and there's more of a curriculum, or even you're once the training's over, you're doing performance support or something. But there should be a little bit more of a strategy as opposed to just like once they leave the room or click the exit button, I'm done.
Yes, and most companies that are established, they have so many resources that are just untapped. And also, when you think about that, it's like, imagine a scenario being for a leader saying, hey, you're not as strong in this communication area, or you're not as strong in this. They realize that, and the next thing I do is I say, here's a list of 5 people at your company who are masters. Reach out to them, hook up with a coaching, a mentoring program. They're open to it,
Which brings us back to the earlier point you were making about learning organizations and learning ecosystems, where training, it has to be just part. And if you've got this larger system where I can hook up with a mentor and learn how to do that skill or something, that's really valuable.
Yeah. Yeah.
What about, I had a question as well. So I think a second use of scenarios that intrigues me, other than just like this element of surprise and introducing me a gap,
Yeah.
is this ability to practice something, either because it's too dangerous or we couldn't cut down the machines, or maybe just because by running me through this in a simulation, either in a classroom or online, I get exposed to it so many more times in a compressed period of time than I would like on the job. Maybe it would take me 20 years to get all those kind of exposures and learn from them. But maybe with scenarios, you can cut that down into like 6 months.
Yeah.
That's a really valuable way to go back to that Anders Ericsson book, to give me deliberate practice and expose me to all these like common problems in different situations where I can develop a really robust mental model about it that you're not likely to do even with great job mentoring, just because they're not going to come up during the first 6 months of your new employee orientation.
Yeah. Oh, I totally agree. And it's funny to me that people design these amazing, like I've seen some great learning, and then they launch it and then they just leave it alone. And I'm like, it takes people like 7 times to get stuff, and you could just basically send it to them again in a month. If you make it onerous, it's a 45-minute thing. I could see somebody not wanting to do it. But if you've got like 3 or 4 scenarios that are pretty punchy, and all of a sudden somebody has to like revisit and rethink something, it's wonderful. It's awesome, because one of the things you want to see is you train them the first time they got this result. A month later, they're making better decisions. A month later after that, they're making better decisions because they're thinking about it on the job now. So the exposure happens. And I always talk about this idea that just because it doesn't matter how awesome your training is, if my cat just died, nothing will stick on that day. And you're really counting on that single event to have impact. And
Right.
That's why we're like, take that thing, unpack it, even space it over time, and constantly keep on feeding it until they say, you know what, I love these scenarios, but can you just give me a new one now? Because I'm pretty good. I've got it. I want that.
But that's a good additional point I haven't thought about the kind of the perils of one and done training is I just might be having a bad day. My cat passed away or something.
Yeah.
But it shows again the value of coming back to things and coming back from in different training methods and different modalities. But I think that's like where like micro learning courses can be used really well, like for space training later. And then you just like give me a 1 minute setup and asks me to answer, solve a scenario. And this takes me 60 seconds at the beginning of my day. I think that's really valuable.
But the process of retrieval, right, is just the idea of testing is that it's the retrieval that helps you learn. So do it as often as possible,
right?
In as many rooms as possible, right? Because as we know from Will Thalheimer, the color of the room affects your retention.
I did not know that, but yeah, and coming at it from different perspectives and using the same skill to solve slightly different problems. And it really strengthen. I think that's a great use of scenario-based training. Or you could, like you said, like 45 minutes, I'm not going to buy into that as a worker if you keep throwing that at me. But if it's a minute and I'm doing it on the mobile phone, that could be great.
Yeah, 100% agree with that.
Well, anything else, Anna, about storytelling and scenarios for training that we should be, any words of wisdom or final thoughts?
Words of wisdom.
Words of encouragement.
Encouragement, yes. I think that you just gotta try it and never compare yourself to everybody else's final product, because that final product is usually a process of iteration over sometimes years, right? Like people look at Broken Coworker and they'll be like, oh, this is so amazing. They'll get overwhelmed by all the pieces that make it so. But one of my biggest pieces of advice is if you like something and you want to create something similar, what you have to do is start deconstructing those pieces and deconstructing more and more of the things that you like to see if there's patterns underneath. And once you find that pattern, which I talk about on my YouTube channel as well, once you find the pattern, you can take that pattern and apply it in any space. So then you're no longer having the anxiety of starting from blank page or trying to figure everything out from scratch. You just have this pattern. You can say, okay, I think this will fit here. Here it is. This part is done. Now let's start asking some good questions to get some info in there. So
great. But I know I've seen you on social media a lot, basically just telling people, hey, don't hold yourself back. Just do it. So I love the fact that you're just telling people, hey, just do it. Don't criticize yourself if it's not what you want it to be, and start off and make it better over time.
Yeah. Picasso painted and it's funny because there's a lot of Picassos in the world as far as like his pieces, but he painted like, I think, a piece a day, every day, just every day he puts together something. So, I mean, if you're putting out something once a year, that's not enough practice, right? Get yourself working out loud, doing things every day, crafting, refining your craft, and then you'll get good over time.
Yeah, I agree. That's why I really like those e-learning communities that have those kind of challenges. And like, I watched when I was a teenage kid, I watched at the Detroit Institute of Arts Film Theater, I watched a movie where Picasso was painting on a transparency with a camera on the opposite side. And not only was he creating any number of paintings per day, but he didn't just sit down and do one thing per painting. It was a constant process of repainting and repainting and repainting. So, if Picasso makes that many errors in his eyes, I think it's okay for us to make an error or two as well.
Yeah, totally. And it is practice makes permanent, right? So make sure you start doing it more.
So, Anna, thank you very much. Where can people go to your website? Where can they find you on social media? How can they contact you and so on?
Well, LinkedIn is also a great place if you can spell my last name. And I'm on YouTube. I have a Facebook page where I do a lot of daily lives too. And there it's kind of cool because people send me questions and I discuss those questions with them, and it's kind of more interactive, and I like that. I'm enjoying it immensely. So that's a good place to be. And ANSIZabramowitz.com, if you can spell that, then or schedule Anna. There's also a schedule Anna if you want to talk to me. So that might be easier for people to spell .com.
And then for those who are wondering how to spell Anna Sabramowitz, let me see if I have this right. ANNASABRAMOWICZ.
Yes, that's pretty good. That's scary good. It took me years to learn my own last name.
You're listening to the E-Learning Scenario Design Podcast with Anna Sabramowitz.